Welcome to another episode of the Dana Yee Show, and in this video I'm going to cover two types of trading and investment accounts, a cash account and a margin account. And then I'm going to go over their differences and why you might choose one over the other. I'm still not a financial advisor and don't plan on becoming one, so don't take anything I say in this video as financial advice. However, I do put a lot of time and effort into these videos, so if you enjoyed this video in particular, make sure to bop that like button and subscribe for all things money and finance. So if you're only going to watch a little bit of this video, this is a brief overview of the differences between the two. So a cash account requires that all transactions must be made with available cash or long positions. This means that you can only buy with the amount of money that is in your account. So with a small example, if you have a $1,000 cash account, you can buy up to $1,000 of stocks, bonds, ETFs, or whatever else you're allowed to buy in the account, but no more. Now in a margin account, you're allowed to borrow money essentially against the value of your account. So in another small example, if we take the same $1,000 account and your brokerage gives you 2-to-1 leverage, this means that for every $1 that you put in, you can buy $2 of stuff. So if you have a $1,000 account, you could buy up to $2,000 of stuff. One really good analogy for this is that a cash account is kind of like a debit card and a margin account is kind of like a credit card. As on a debit card, if you have a $1,000 balance, you can only buy $1,000 of stuff, but on a credit card, you can buy more money than you actually have, which might not be a good idea, but the idea is that you can borrow money from the bank and pay it back later with interest. And one thing to note about margin accounts is that if you hold margin overnight, you're going to have to pay back interest. Wow, that is terribly written, but you'll have to pay back the original amount with interest, as most cases of borrowing money. So one piece I wanted to add to what I said before about a cash account, where I said that you can only buy it with basically cash that you have. Another important thing to note is that in a cash account, you only can buy with settled funds. I'm not going to go into the nitty-gritty details, but when you buy and sell stocks, there is something called a T-2 settlement period. So even after you sell a stock and the cash shows up in your account, it's in the form of what's called unsettled cash, and technically you can't buy new stocks with that unsettled cash, and it takes 2 days for the cash to settle. Also, one other side note, if you buy and sell with unsettled cash, this can lead to something called the good faith violation, which, as the name might suggest, is not a good thing. Now for a margin account. Now, I've seen a lot of things online that are like, margin is bad, don't touch margin, blah, 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 blah. But I want to break down what margin is and why in some cases it can be a good idea. As I mentioned earlier, a margin account allows you to borrow money essentially from your bank, and then you'll have to pay it back with interest in the future. And what does this do? This leverages your positions. I'll give you an example in a second. And one other note is that you can actually make cash withdrawals against your margin. So if you have $1,000 of available margin, you could take out like, I don't know, $500 to pay the bills or something, and then pay back next month with interest. Okay, so for an example of a margin account, I'll try and keep it quick because I feel like my examples do get long sometimes, but let's consider two accounts. One is a cash account with $1,000, and the second is a margin account also with $1,000. But this brokerage in the margin account offers you 2-to-1 leverage, which means that you can buy $2,000 of stuff. Now let's consider some arbitrary company whose share price is a really nice round $100. Now in your cash account, you can buy $1,000 of this stock or 10 shares. And in the margin account, since you have 2-to-1 leverage, you can buy $2,000 of this stock. Now let's consider two scenarios, one that's really good and one that's really bad. In the first case, what happens if this stock doubles? And in the second case, what happens if this stock gets halved? In the case where the stock doubles, in your cash account, your $1,000 becomes $2,000, and in the margin account, your $2,000 becomes $4,000. So with some quick maths, this here is a gain of $1,000, and this here is a gain of $2,000. So cool, your wins become bigger. Now what happens about your losses? As you can guess, they also become bigger. So in the case where the stock goes to $50, in the first case, your $1,000 becomes $500, and in the second case, the $2,000 you have in the position becomes $1,000. But if we look at the actual dollar amounts, your initial investment here of $1,000 lost $500 of value, but in this second one, you're losing $1,000. And note that these both are off an initial investment of $1,000, and this just goes to show that margin amplifies gains and losses. A couple other notes about margin accounts: you don't need to wait for funds to settle to buy and sell, where in a cash account, if you sell $1,000 of stuff, you're going to have to wait 2 days to buy and sell again. but in a margin account, you can buy and sell with that $1,000 multiple times on the same day. However, slight follow-up to this, in a margin account with less than $25,000, you're subject to something called the PDT rule, which limits the number of day trades you can take to 3 day trades over any 5-day period. I actually want to make a future video about this, but this is one of the restrictions with a small margin account. A third point about margin accounts is that if you use a lot of margin and your stocks go down a lot, I won't give an example in this video, but you can get something what's called a margin call, which is when a brokerage emails you. I would assume it'll be an email, but I'm just gonna use margin call. So this is when a brokerage would be like, yo, we need you to deposit $2,000 now or we're selling all of your stocks. So that can be scary and definitely something to keep in mind if you plan on using margin. Okay, so I've covered what margin is, what a cash account is. Now I want to compare them side by side. So in my lovely graphic here, I will have a margin account on the left versus a cash account on the right. In a cash account, you basically have one-to-one leverage, which is no leverage, right? So if you put in $100, you can only buy $100 of stuff. Whereas in a margin account, you have leverage, which can amplify your gains and your losses. Next, in a margin account, you don't need settled funds, whereas in a cash account, you need to wait for funds to settle. Another thing about margin accounts is that if you have a small account, again, so if it's less than 25, that does not say $25,000, you are essentially restricted on how frequently you can trade, whereas in a cash account, you can take as many trades as you want as long as you have the cash in the account. Another difference is that in a margin account, you need to pay interest because you're borrowing money. Although one thing to note, this is only on margin that you hold overnight. So for example, if you have $100 in your account and trade for $200 and then sell it again for $200, even though you're briefly in margin, you won't be charged interest on that because you didn't hold it overnight. Conversely, in a cash account, you don't have to pay interest because it's just cash that you have. And I can't write and spell at the same time, so this was supposed to say no interest. Another risk of margin accounts is that you can get a margin call, which again earlier is when your broker calls you and says, you need to deposit money now or we're going to sell everything. And this can't happen in a cash account, so no margin call. So now that I've covered the differences between a margin and a cash account, which one should you use? Again, as non-financial advice, I will scroll my T-chart down and sort of categorize types of people that I think should use different accounts. Again, non-financial advice. First group of people, if your intent is to YOLO in the markets where, I don't know, you put a couple $100 into options that expire really soon, or you buy some stock that's being pumped up on the internet, so not really trading or investing, but just having fun and gambling a little bit, you should definitely use a cash account. Why is this? Because in a cash account, your maximum loss is 100%. If you put in $1, you can lose maximum $1. However, in a margin account, you can lose more than 100% of your initial principal. And I've seen many cases of this online, and they're very scary to see where people put in, I don't know, $25,000 and they lose $100,000. That is really, really bad. So if your plan is just to have a little bit of fun, I would definitely recommend a cash account so you don't lose more money than you put in. Second group of people, beginners. In general, I think beginners should stick to cash. So similar to the YOLO group, you cannot lose more than 100% of your initial investment. And usually when you start, you don't know what margin is or you don't understand the ins and outs and how to use it safely. So it's much safer to start with a cash account. These groups aren't mutually exclusive, but these are just the groups that I came up with. Another group of people is people with under $25,000 in their account. I didn't mean to write $25, so under $25,000 in their account. And in this case, you should stick to a cash account because when your account is under $25,000 and you have a margin account, you're subject to the PDT rule, which has limitations on day trades and stuff. So if you're under 25K, I would recommend sticking to a cash account. Okay, now essentially the group of people that I came up with that should use a margin account is if they meet a few things. Firstly, they have an account greater than $25,000, so they're not subject to the PDT rule. They understand the risks of a margin account, whether it be margin calls, amplified gains, amplified losses, and paying interest on the margin that you borrow. Additionally, these people also should have a plan. So even if you have $50,000, you understand the risks of margin, but your plan is to just kind of YOLO it. That's not really a plan. So I would not recommend a margin account if you don't have a plan with what you're going to do with your margin account. And a couple things I want to note about margin. There are so many things out there that say margin is dangerous. Don't you dare touch margin. It is really, really dangerous. And I'm just repeating myself again, but I don't think margin is that dangerous. yes, it can be used in a really dangerous way, but if you know what you're doing and you understand the risk, there are safe ways to use margin. For example, if your brokerage charges 2 to 3% interest on your margin, but you think you can make an 8 to 9 or more annual return, it would be worth it to you to borrow the money at 2 to 3% to make a return of 8 to 9%. And another thing to note is that you don't have to take on more risk if you have a margin account. You can use a margin account like a cash account, so you don't have to borrow money. You can also just trade or invest with the money that you have on a margin account. This was a lot, and I feel like I've been talking for a while, so I hope you enjoyed this video, learned something new, and if you haven't liked this video already, what are you doing? Anyway, I'll see you guys next time.